What is going on, everybody? Maximus Keyes back with a brand new episode of Genre Evolution, episode 5. Got some brand new heat for you guys today. But of course, before we continue, please like, subscribe, favorite, and share this video to anybody that you know. And please feel free to check out last week's episode, link in the description. Let's get started. So this episode of Genre Evolution, we're going to be talking about how the East Coast pretty much re-innovated punk music from the traditional way straight to the hardcore way. Now, if we're going to talk about this, we have to speak about the history of punk and proto-punk music as we knew it. So punk is a music genre that was generated in the Midwest, Detroit to be exact, and it was pretty much a blues-based genre that had different influences from R&B music, groups that weren't part of the British invasion, and wild theatrical performers depending on what your role was in the band. And the genre actually started to generate throughout the mid-60s and late 60s and started to get rebranded throughout the early 70s. The people from the Midwest that helped inspire the punkish sound were the MC5, the Stooges, and Death. Now, punk around the late 60s and early 70s were very heavily influenced by a lot of political things that were going on in Detroit at the time, from the Detroit riots to police brutality and just straight up disrespectful things that were going on at the time. And of course, the MC5 was against white supremacy and everything that went on around that time. And because of the stuff that they were witnessing, they started to speak very loudly and proudly against racism. Tracks that described their agenda was American Ruse, Come Together, and a cover that they did by John Lee Hooker called Motor City Burnin'. Death talked about a lot of political things as well in some of their music and their old recordings from the early 70s, but the track that described them a lot more when it came to their music was Politicians in My Eyes. But funny thing, the only people that weren't political and pretty much didn't think about a lot of things when it came to government issues or just anything that was involved within that type of circle was the Stooges. Now the Stooges, they weren't the best musicians in the world, but they made great songs, and they sort of gave the punk attitude by just not caring about anything. Nothing was political based, they weren't angry at anything, they were just being free. Because of their free expression, they inspired different groups, but we're gonna get to that in a minute. Now, heading towards the East Coast, there were different people who were somewhat taking on that agenda of free expression. People like the New York Dolls, Television, the Ramones, and plenty more. Punk itself also traveled around England, of course. Groups that came out of there were the Sex Pistols, the Damned, and the Clash, and so many other groups that came out of England who were inspired by the Midwest sound of proto-punk music. And some of those British acts actually helped inspire and spark so many later punk groups from the later 70s and early 80s who would help take on the hardcore scene in the East Coast. Groups like Icemen, the Misfits, the Ramones, and plenty more. And with this genre, fashion was changing up a lot more as well as the music genre. Hardcore itself was a bit more different from a lot of the proto-punk early stuff that was coming out in the later 60s and early 70s. And during the late 60s and early 70s, a lot of things were more colorful than usual. Groups from Detroit were either wearing stuff with ruffles, dress shoes, or sometimes just dress boots. A bit of a look of the more professional side, I guess you would say. But then later fashion started to change up a little bit, where it was more ripped pants, denim or leather jackets, or pretty much anything rugged and raw that was sort of different from what was going on in the early 70s and late 60s. But not only that, but the music got a lot more heavier. I mean, if you listen to some of the MC5 stuff or some of the Stooges stuff, you could tell that they listened to R&B music to come up with a lot of the changes for the music, and there were different elements of breakdowns within certain songs. But within the later 70s and early 80s, however, guitars were more distorted, and things got a lot more heavier and faster for the better. Hell was raised more than usual, and there was more of an underground scene going on in the East Coast more than there was back in the early 70s and later 60s. I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong, there were a lot of groups that came out in the late 60s and early 70s who led the same example as the MC5 or Death, and England included, but the East Coast had more of a tighter community when it came to this stuff. But I will say that they got a lot of flack, just like the MC5, when it came to the political standpoint, standing for people and the defenseless. But pretty much, I believe that the East Coast hardcore punk scene deserves a lot of praise from a lot of people, specifically because of their willpower, willing to speak on topics that a lot of people wouldn't have the guts to do. And I will say that about the Detroit punk movement and the British punk movement as well, because they really do deserve it. Thank you to everybody that watched this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please like, subscribe, favorite, and share this video to anybody that you know. And please feel free to check out some more videos on this channel of either Genre Evolution or my band KOM. We recently just released a brand new video of us performing one of our originals called Rejection. So please feel free to check that out. Have a great rest of your day, and peace to all of you.